Hi, everybody. I'm Dottie, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi.
And I love being sober, and I love being a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to thank the committee for inviting me to come, and I want to thank you for all your wonderful hospitality. And I want to thank all of you that are here, and for all the love that you've extended me to give me the strength that I'm here today. And the only reason I am here today is because of the love of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. That healing love, because that's what healed me when I was new and when I came to you. And that's what's still healing me in this program, is your love. And I want to thank you all for that. To tell you a little bit about what I used to be like and what happened and what I'm trying to be like today. For some reason, I was always a very emotional child. And I never seemed to be able to deal with life on life's terms. Now, all the things I'm going to talk to you about are things that I've learned from you since I came here, because I certainly didn't know those things when I was out there. I was born and raised in Kansas, which is a dry state. I'm the only girl, and I had 4 brothers, and there was no alcoholism in my family. And so I can't say this thing happened or that, and that's why I drank, because I didn't have any of those things. We didn't have anything materially, but I grew up in the Depression, and nobody did, and it wasn't a big thing. But I had the things that were important, the love and closeness of a family and relatives, and I led pretty much of a sheltered life. I just wasn't out there among them. But it was the feelings that I had, and it seems like I had some kind of a computer problem, where my computer up here was different than other kids, because I could hear the same thing that somebody else could hear, but it got clogged in my computer and it came out different. I had different things attached to it than other people did. It seemed to be able to roll off them like water off a duck's back. But those things I picked up. I've always been extremely sensitive to things and feelings and things, that I can pick things up different. I have a very sensitive computer up there. And I had a lot of illness when I was growing up, and I think a lot of it had to do with this sensitivity. I had asthma and hay fever when I grew up, and I know that one of the things I remember in school was just trying to breathe. The big thing was if I could just breathe. I always had earaches, and my sinuses were always clogged, and I'd pray for recess so I could go out and blow my nose, because it was always so embarrassing. It was never an ending battle. I had a lot of allergies, and I used to break out, and I remember in the hot summers in Kansas wearing long-sleeve blouses because I didn't want anybody to see my rash. And I always, like I said, had this sensitivity, this very weak stomach. And I could throw up at anything. And even if, when I was in school, if some other kid would be sick and throw up, I'd throw up. And it was always very embarrassing. In high school, the boys used to like to tease me about it. They'd say something squirmy or something, and I would throw up. I'd perform for them. And many times I wouldn't get out of the lunchroom in time. And they'd think it was funny, but it was very embarrassing to me. And I also got car sick, and I'd land the big date, and I'd get sick and throw up before I got there, and that was always so embarrassing. Then like I say, I had all these feelings, and I didn't know how to deal with them. And I developed a giggling problem when I was young. And I think it was just out of fear. The one feeling I think that I could feel mostly was this fear, and it was the kind of paralyzing fear, because I felt so unworthy myself with all of these things that I had, all of this illness and all of these things. I always felt less than, and I think I was so scared of doing something wrong that I would rather, it was that paralyzing fear that I'd rather not try than make a mistake type thing. And so it just paralyzed me. I couldn't read, I couldn't spell, I could never recite in front of the class because it would just paralyze me. And I developed, like I said, this giggling problem, and I just got in trouble for giggling. When I was young. If I always laughed when the worst thing in the world you could do would be laugh. At the wrong place, and that's when I laughed. If I was in church and a nun sat near me, or, anything, well, then the nun would sit next to me or tap me or whatever, and then it never made me unlaugh. I would make loud screechy noises, and they'd take me out of church and tell me I was sacrilegious, and, and I had no respect for authority and those things, and after a while I believed it, and because I couldn't figure out why I laughed. But certain things in my life set up a pattern for me that I followed, but I didn't know this naturally at the time. I remember when I was in the 3rd grade and my little girlfriend, you know, when you're a little kid, you have one little friend. And I had this little friend and she and I, sat next to one another because our last names were with the same initial. And we always were at recess and lunch, and we'd go to one another's houses all the time, this little friend of mine. And one day she went home, and that weekend she died. And I remember the feeling. I mean, she died of diphtheria. And of course, they didn't have any service or anything. And I remember they told me, I remember how I didn't want to go to school, but I had to go and sit by this empty seat. And I remember the feeling of sitting next to this empty seat. And just the imagination and the feelings and that kind of thing. And that set up a pattern for me. That how I would try and suppress those feelings and pretend they weren't there. And not knowing how to deal with this. Because the television wasn't out at that time, and you didn't see or hear or know any of these things. But this kind of set up a pattern for me of trying to suppress and run from whatever pain it was, because I could never deal with it. And then I remember when I was in the 6th grade and my youngest brother died. And I remember that morning because I used to take care of my grandmother because she was confined to her bed, and before she died for many years, so I only knew her when she was in bed. And I used to take care of her in the summers. And when I would go, I remember this one morning I went over, my dad took me over to take care of her, and my mother was taking my little brother to the hospital for this tonsillectomy, and my mother called me, and she told me to pray because my little brother, they weren't able to bring him out from under the ether, and for me to pray. And I remember how I prayed. And then my aunt came home early and told me my little brother had died. And I took the responsibility. Because I thought if I'd have prayed better, he wouldn't have died. And this is the pattern that I set up. I'm always going to take care of it. I'm going to fix it. Let me settle things out here and take care of whatever it is to be taken care of. And that's the way I reacted to things. And then I had another little brother who was confined to his bed for 3 years, and I used to help take care of him. And after I graduated from high school at 18, I was confined to my bed for 6 months, and they didn't know when I would get up. And I remember because I was going away to school, and of course I couldn't go away, and everybody else went off to school, and I went to bed. And how the feelings that I felt at the time, all of these things happening, and what have I done, and this type of a thing. And of course that was before television, or at least we didn't have one, and so there wasn't much for me to do. But just feel sorry for myself type thing. And I didn't really get into my drinking. These are just feelings I had because I was, Kansas is a dry state. I wasn't involved in it. I didn't know people, even in school. It wasn't until after I got out of school. And once I got up, they told the doctor said I could get up, and I had to kind of learn to walk all over again and that kind of thing. And I remember then when I went out, when I moved and had my first drink. My first real drink. I remember it was just because I had this drink and it was magic. All this fear and this panic and this knot inside of me where I was so inferior and I couldn't seem to talk and this, when I drank, it took that away. It took that away. And all of a sudden, it was magic. I mean, I could talk, I could dance, I could be a part of, and all of these things. So I drank naturally every chance I got because it was this magic thing. Now, I got sick when I drank. I was never a good drinker. But you see, I'd been sick all my life. I could throw up at anything, And so when I would get sick, I had a built-in excuse for why I got sick. It was one of those squirmy things somebody said or, something like that. I always had this excuse. Of course, I didn't think it could be the alcohol. I tried everything not to get drunk. When I started getting drunk, I started having blackouts. I didn't know that's what they were called. I never had a good capacity for drinking. And I tried everything not to get drunk because I didn't want to get drunk because I wanted you to like me and I wanted to be a lady and I wanted to be all those things I heard about in school, And so I didn't want to do these things. So I tried everything not to get drunk. I drank olive oil before I went out. I drank cream to coat the stomach. Somebody said if you eat chocolate, you can't get drunk. and I ate chocolate. And I always ate dinner before I went out to dinner because somebody said if you can't get drunk on a full stomach. And I thought by the time I eat and we go out, I'll just eat a little bit. My date will just think I'm dainty and feminine. The only difference was I was a fat or drunk. And then if you've had more, things to eat and you've got a weak stomach, you've got a little more to perform with. But, like I said, and I tried everything, many things happened to me when I drank. I remember this first date I had when I moved to California, and this girl from the church choir fixed me up with her cousin, and we went down on a great big boat down on the marina, and I had never been on a boat before except a little rowboat my daddy had made in the garage, and on occasion he would take it out to this man-made lake for fishing, and that was my boating career. And I don't know, but if you're from Kansas, there's not a lot to talk about, and, in California, everybody knows everything. They're so worldly. And, you can't very well impress somebody about the A&W root beer stand or Bobo's drive-in. That was my big extent. And anyway, we went down in this big boat, and everybody was talking about all this boating stuff and everything. And I hadn't had a drink, and I couldn't talk. And I remembered my brother had a friend that had a boat, and when I got a chance to say something, I said, well, I have a brother, and I said, he has a friend that has a 19-inch boat. And I didn't know I had said inch instead of foot. But I will never forget the look on the guy's face. Because he looked at me, and he said, oh, really? He said, well, what's he do, play in the bathtub with it? And, of course, then I was just mortified, I wish I hadn't said anything. But then we had a drink. And once I had a drink, it took that away, and I was okay. I was able to function. And that's just kind of the way it was. Like I said, many things happened to me. I remember these, like, blackouts, but I didn't know that's what they were called where I drank, and nobody ever talked about a blackout or anything. I used to just think it was amnesia. At first, I thought people were lying. When people would say I did something or I knocked something over or something, and I knew they were lying because I would never do that, And I would remember going, and I would remember coming home. I just thought it was a short night, And then, of course, my blackouts got longer, and I don't remember coming home. And the panic and the fear would set in. And I remember having my other younger brother, before he also died, take me out up and down trying to find my car because I didn't know where it was, didn't know how I got home, and I was petrified, And then I wouldn't drink for a while, But if I didn't drink, I couldn't talk, and I couldn't function. And then I'd think, well, my system, I've got this weak system. Now maybe I can have this drink, And then, of course, then it would start all over again. Like I said, many things happened, when I drank, many things that are funny and hysterical, and you tell everybody about all the fun you had out there, spreading joy, trying to water ski behind a boat in a window display, or some of the fun things you have, doing the cha-cha on the table in the cocktail lounge. I couldn't even talk, and yet I'd have a drink and could do the cha-cha on the table, and all of those type of things. One of my favorite things to do when I went out, because I had this terrible talking problem, was I used to go and with this girlfriend of mine, and I'd pretend I was from a foreign country and I couldn't speak English. And it was real neat because I didn't have to worry about what to say or what to do. I would just go and smile, and, and people would buy you drinks and things. And every once in a while I'd make a few funny sounds that I thought maybe sounded like this foreign language and everything. And, I didn't even think about it till after I got sober. But, I didn't even have enough sense to stick with the same foreign country. Each time I went, I was with some other exotic place, And I'm sure, I used to at the same places. They probably thought, oh, God, here she comes. I wonder where she's from tonight. But I didn't think of that till after I got sober. But like I say, many things happened to me, many things I was very ashamed of. I wish I hadn't said it. I wish I hadn't been there. I wish I could turn the calendar back so I didn't have to know what I'd said or done or who I'd hurt. But the thing I like to remember most is my last drunk, because it's what brought me to you people. Now, it's not necessarily where I ended up in the worst place or the worst condition or the worst situation, but it was the end for me. And I had my last drink. It'll be 22 years this Christmas that I had my last drink. And it just seems impossible because the time has gone so fast. But anyway, it was Christmas, and Christmas Eve, my roommates were both school teachers, and they had gone home for the holidays, and I was I worked for the telephone company. I was a service representative supervisor at the time for the telephone company. And, it was all right on Christmas Eve to go out and have a drink at lunch, And so I was out having my drinks for lunch with the girls. And then I went to my parents' home after that for Christmas Eve. And when I got there, I was in pretty rare shape. And I remember that we went next door to the neighbors to this big open house, and I was in a blackout shortly after I got there. I don't remember anything until Christmas morning when I came to my family's home, and they were talking about people that were there, and I didn't even know they were there. And, of course, I didn't let my family know. And I made up my mind that I wasn't going to drink Christmas because I knew long before this I could never guarantee my conduct once I took a drink. And like I said, there was no alcoholism in the family. We had all this huge family get-together with all my brothers and their wives and children and friends of the family and all of these non-alcoholic people. And so I made up my mind I wouldn't drink, and I didn't until dinner was on the table. And then I got to thinking, I'm only going to have one drink. It'll be impossible to get drunk because we'll eat immediately. I'm just going to have this one drink so I can feel part of my own family. And, of course, I fixed the drink in the kitchen in a water glass when nobody was looking. And I don't remember finishing the drink. I don't remember anything until I came to sometime in the middle of the night. And it was dark outside, and I laid there with my thoughts. What did I do? What did I say? Who did I hurt this time over and over? No matter how hard I tried to remember, I couldn't. And as I'm laying there trying to think of a way to get out of the house, I thought if I can just get up and get out of this house so I don't have to find out what I've said or done or who I hurt, I just want out. And as I'm laying there trying to think of a way to get out of the house, I heard my mother up. And I'm sure my mother was up because she was laying in there, unable to sleep, worrying about me. And but as soon as I heard her up, I got up and I met her in the hall. And my mother had that look in her eye that every alcoholic has seen in the eyes of the people that love them. It doesn't matter if it's your mother or your father, your husband, your wife, or your children. Every alcoholic has seen that hopeless, helpless, bewildered, fearful, disgusted, panicky look that the non-alcoholic has, because that's the look my mother had. She looked at me and she said, "Oh, why do you drink so much? I was so ashamed of you again." And I couldn't stand it. I wish I could have looked at her and said, "Mom, you don't understand. The only reason I drink like this is it's the only thing that makes me feel equal with other people. It's the only thing that makes me function. Mom, I've never wanted to make you ashamed. The only thing I've ever wanted to do is make you proud of me. I wish I could go out there and be like my brothers. No matter what they did, they made the folks proud of them. They were good, decent people. That's all I wanted to be. But you see, I hadn't been to you folks yet, and I didn't know those things. The only thing I could do is the same thing I had done so many times before. That's look at the floor, so I didn't have to look in her eyes, tell her to get off my back and leave me alone because I had more important things to do than listen to her bitch at me." Of course, I got out of there, but it wasn't soon enough because she told me of some of my performance. She told me how I had embarrassed the whole family, and how they were all so ashamed of me, and that they hadn't raised me to be this type of a person, and where had they gone wrong, and why was God punishing them, and on, and I couldn't stand it. But anyway, I got out of there, as soon as I could, and, I looked at the floor so I didn't have to look in her eyes, and I told her to get off my back and leave me alone. I had more important things to do than listen to her bitch at me. And, of course, I got out of there and went back, told her I had something to do, and I went to my apartment crying all the way, praying to die. I went and threw myself on the bed and crying and saying that same thing I always used to say, "Why me, God? Why me? I didn't mean for it to be like this. God, I didn't want to do these things. I don't know why you made the mistake of putting me here on this earth. And if you did make the mistake of putting me here, why do you leave me here? I don't know why you didn't take me rather than my younger brother. He could have amounted to something. My parents are good, decent people. They don't deserve having someone like me." Finally, I said, "God, if there's anything you have for me to do in this lifetime, I wish you would please show me what it is and show me how to do it." And it was shortly after this I thought of a girlfriend of mine. She and I at one time had belonged to an organization called Bachelorettes. And she had joined Alcoholics Anonymous and married, and she had a new baby, and she lived real close to me. And I called her on the phone. Of course, I got her out of bed. It was still dark outside. And she wanted to know what I wanted. Of course, I didn't tell her I had a problem. I just told her I wanted to come and see what she got for Christmas. And she told me I couldn't come over till 1 o'clock. And I'll tell you, I didn't think 1 o'clock would ever get there. But finally, I got there, and I didn't any more than get there till there was a knock at the door. And it was an AA couple, both of them sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you know how they are, And they came in hugging and kissing and wonderful and all over the place and started to drink coffee and talk about Alcoholics Anonymous. So I listened. I thought it would be interesting. And I'll never forget the guy because he mentioned the word blackout. And I said, what's that? He said, it's when you drink so much you can't remember. And so, boy, I shut up and didn't ask any more questions. But then he followed it by saying, he said, do you know that every time you have a blackout, you get brain damage? Oh, God, I couldn't get that off my mind because I was never the brightest thing in the world to begin with. And I thought, oh, my God, now I've got all this brain damage stuff, And I couldn't wait till they jolly-hoed out. And then another AA came wonderful and through, and she finally left, and I got up the nerve to say, I may have had one of those once, And I said, but I just like to know what I can drink so I won't get drunk. And she said, 7-Up. And, of course, I never thought of that. But anyway, she took me to my first meeting that Friday after Christmas. Now, when I came, I certainly wasn't an alcoholic. I just came as a visitor. An alcoholic was somebody who had those kids they didn't feed, But, and I was single. I couldn't be an alcoholic, But anyway, I went to the meeting. There's about 135 people there, and we walked in. There's a next-door neighbor to my folks, and I let her know I'm there visiting with my friend. And anyway, they took me to the second row and sat me down. And back then, they didn't ask the new people to raise their hand or to give their name or anything. They just said, did anybody bring any newcomers? And if so, would you please stand and introduce them? Well, when they said this, I turned around to look. I wanted to see what they looked like when they brought them in. And as I'm turned around looking, she stood up. And she pulled me up. She said, this is Dottie, and it's her first meeting. And I almost died. I thought, my God, my life is over. And I thought, well, the word's out. There's nothing left for me to do but go to these meetings, be miserable the rest of my life. And, of course, one thing you learn about being a martyr, is you have to stand in line. Really gripes you, when you've got this major sadness, and then somebody else has got it worse. Really gripes you, And, but one thing they told me is they said to get a lot of telephone numbers, and they said call before you take a drink or any mood-changing chemical. You call before. If you take a drink and call us, we're going to hang up on you. We will not talk to you because you're going to have to finish out your drunk. And I remember the first time, I'm sure it was some type of a major sadness, but I decided to call it. The Palm Springs Roundup was on, and I couldn't afford to go, and I didn't. And, all the people, my sponsor and all the people I was close to had gone. And so I don't know what this major sadness was, but I'm sure it was real bad. But I decided to call people. But, of course, I wouldn't tell them I heard her, anything. You just call and say, hi, and they're either changing the baby or on the way out the door or something, and then I'd say, oh, ha-ha, and you hang up and be mad at them, And I'd think, see, they don't care, and, you get this thing. But the thing that was interesting was, you see, I forgot whatever it was I was sad about because I had a mad. And, as long as I had some negative emotion to nurture, I was comfortable, And, I told myself, well, I can't wait to get to the meeting and tell them how phony and all this. Of course, I didn't do it. I was afraid they wouldn't like me, But you know what I learned from that? It wasn't then. It wasn't until years later that it dawned on me. When they said call before you take a drink, they didn't say call and we're going to take your pain away. They didn't say call and we're going to solve your problem. The only thing they said was call before you take a drink. And you see, I found out that because I took the action, I did what they asked me to do, I am still here sober almost 22 years. And that's all I have done. I have done what they have asked me to do. You see, I found out it was really unimportant what anybody said on the other end of the line. And it was unimportant if they even answered the telephone. The thing that was important was that I took the action. And because of that, I'm still here. And that's the way it's been for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have just done what they have asked me to do. And I had the type of, sponsor. They said to get a home group, become an active member of that group. And then she told me to stick with the winners. And then she explained what a winner was. And she said a winner is someone that goes and is active and has a smile on their face and a handshake, even though they may be going through a lot of pain, they may be going through anything, but they're still there with a smile. They said, stay away from those people that are complaining and mumbling and grumbling, taking everybody's inventory and all that because they're losers. So you stick with the winners. They said it takes one person to pull you down, and it takes 10 to bring you up, because that's the type that we are. And so they said, stay away from those complainers and moaners and groaners. And I'm grateful for that because I did. I did what they asked me to say. And they said at the meeting that became my home group that action was the magic word. And they said the clique met in the kitchen after the meeting, and I met in the kitchen. I wanted to be in the clique. And that's before they even had styrofoam cups. We did dishes. We did those cups out there. And man, I'll tell you, I loved it. I really did. It was very important to me because, when you're new and you're scared to death, even though somebody brings you in, people come in, they introduce you to about 15 people, and then they walk off and they're talking to everybody, and you stand there looking dumb, And it's really difficult, when because there you are standing around trying to act cool and feel comfortable, and you just feel real goony, And everybody knows everybody but you. And it's awful hard. But if you're busy and you've got something to do, I don't care what it is, it makes you feel more a part of. So man, I was in there, I went to that kitchen, I was in there drying those cups, and I'll tell you that was neat. Because it's a lot easier if you're doing something, and keeping busy than it is standing around, trying to think of something to say. And so I was big in that kitchen. And now if they'd ever told me I was going to talk, I'd have been long gone because I had my giggling problem for years. And in fact, people that know me when I came in, they nicknamed me Giggles at my group. And I remember the first time at a participation meeting, they call on me, and I said, oh, no, I can't please, and you give your little fit, and they make you do it anyway. They said, well, all you have to do is get up and state your name and your disease, and then you can sit down, and that's all I did for years. I'd say, I'm Dottie, alcoholic, giggle hysterically, and go sit down. And in fact, after I was sober a year, they had an election and made me secretary, and I told them I couldn't do it, but they said I had to try. And at that time, they had to read this big list of announcements or something, and I got the giggles, and I couldn't finish them, and somebody else had to do it. And then they tried me the next week with the same result, and they decided I should be treasurer. And then after I was sober a year, my sponsor told me to go to the institutional committee meeting, and she said, they may have a job down there for you. And she wasn't going, but she told me to go and told me where it was, and I went by myself, And so down there, they were giving out panels that night, and they gave me this panel, and I told the guy, I said, you can't do that, I can't talk, and I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, well, do you have a valid driver's license? I said, well, certainly, and he said, well, do you have a car? And I said, yes, and he said, well, all you have to do is get the people and take them to put the meeting on. I said, oh, I can do that. And they gave me this panel. It was at 3rd and San Pedro, the Volunteers of America in the middle of Skid Row in Los Angeles. And I had that panel for over a year and a half. And I finally got where I went up there where I could at least introduce the leader, and stuff. But, I think that was a turning point in my sobriety because it was like I had my eyes completely and totally turned inward. The only one I was thinking about was me. Was I doing what you wanted me to do? Was I okay? Did you like me? Was everything okay? And up there, I would see some of these people that they just brought in, that night that hadn't been cleaned up yet. And I remember how concerned I was, hoping that they would stay sober and everything. And I remember this one guy in particular, when I went back the next month, he was clean and shaven, and he looked much younger than he had when they brought him in that first night. And I remember how excited I was that he was still sober, And there was a little guy there named Shorty, and he used to meet me downstairs and always save a parking space for me. And I would be so concerned about these people that I took my eyes off myself and was concerned about another human being. And it was the process of turning my eyes from completely and totally inward to outward till I could look my fellow man in the eye and be equal for the first time in my life. I was never equal before. I was either above him or below him, but I was never equal till long after I was sober in AA. And I had the type of sponsor also that told me, no matter what kind of a problem you have, it's in the book. Read the book. And, I was never a good reader, And then she told me I had to read the big book every night. Oh, But then she was real smart because she said, all you have to do is read one paragraph. Gosh, I could do that, But I don't remember one time only reading one paragraph. I'd read several pages. And you know how excited you are when you've done something your sponsors, told you to do. And you just can't wait to get and tell them, And then you get to the meeting and they don't have time for you. Because they know everybody. And, they're talking to all of these other people and everything. And they don't really care. And, so you get there and then you think, well, heck, I'm just going to leave and I'll show them. And just about the time you turn, they'll say, I want to talk to you, or something. And then, of course, you wait around, you're the last one, and they see outside at the car for 2 seconds. And I remember I finally said, well, I finished the big book. She's good now, you can start over, and everything. And, then she also had this thing that no matter what it was, you had to write. Write this inventory. And, I, of course, didn't tell her, but I knew it wasn't necessary for me, But anyway, because I thought that really the only shortcoming and character defect I had, I was too nice. and people took advantage, But anyway, no matter what happened, she'd tell me to write. And, you could have your battery dead on the car, and she says, write an inventory. And, but anyway, I remember when I had my 4th step written, and I always thought, well, I may write it, but I'm certainly not going to do step 5. But it's a funny thing that once you've got 4, step 5 seems relatively easy. But, it just seems impossible if you hadn't done 4. And, it's amazing, that step 6 and 7, is a lot easier if you've done 4 and 5, Amazing how that works. But anyway, I just continued to do what they asked me to do and go to the meetings. I was secretary of the Central Service Committee. I had to type minutes for the bulletin and just, all of these different things that I was never one to say, yay, I'll do this or that. I just what they asked me to do and I did it. And somehow I always had some kind of a commitment. I always had something that I had to do and where I had to be, and you just can't leave. You got a responsibility. You got something to do. And that's why I think the action is so important. There's always something to do and some place to go, And so that's what I've done in Alcoholics Anonymous. And like I say, I was single when I came in, and I was a young people then, and there weren't that many young people, and anyway, if they were, it seemed like boy walk in, meet girl, and off into happy destiny, and it seemed like there'd be 100 couples in Dottie, 50 couples in Dottie. It was always just, and I used to say, God, can't you see if you would just send me someone? I could certainly be more spiritual, because, it's a lot easier to carry the message if you're happy and content than if you're lonely and sad. And people always gave me hope all my life, they said, God's getting him ready. God's got someone in mind for you and he's getting him ready, and I always had an aunt that said there's a lid to every pot, and so I thought, yeah, he's getting his degrees and his business going and everything. I never dreamed he's in the penitentiary getting ready. But I was sober 4.5 years when I got married, and I married another member of this fellowship. He was a widower, and he had 2 children, and I became a wife and a mother all at the same time, and I knew what it was going to be like. I saw Sound of Music, but it's not like that, I had to grow up, because all of the things and the feelings and things that I had run from all my life, I was able to suppress them, and I didn't know I was doing that. But, if you've suppressed feelings all your life, I don't know, eventually they say what goes down must come up, and eventually they're going to have to surface. And I don't know of a better place in the world for them to surface than in marriage. Because, all of a sudden, I can remember this anger coming out, and I'd think the kids would do something, I'd say, get out of this kitchen or something, and, they'd look at me like, God, what's wrong with her? And I'd think, my God, look what you did to me. I used to be so nice, but, when something comes up, it's because love is a healer. And love brings up everything unlike itself. Everything the opposite of love surfaces in love. And the reason is so the love of the other person can heal them. The only problem is if you both have something surfacing at the same time. Now that's called a fight. But it's like when I came to this program. It was the love of the people that helped heal me. This love, and it still is today. It's that love that's healing. And I remember I'd gone to a social function one day it was up in Beverly Hills, and in fact it was all these girls I'd been in this bachelorettes with, and they had all married at this time but me, and they had all married rather well. And we were at this lunch course, they were all drinking champagne but me, and they were talking about their maids and things, and their husbands and all this, and of course I was just feeling more miserable, and I thought, God, if I had what they had, I could be happy too. Look at them, big deal. And all this feeling was coming over me, and I couldn't shake it, and I thought, how can I get out of this place? Finally it was over, and I got in the car, and I'm driving the freeway back home, and I can't get rid of this feeling. I still have that feeling, that worminess, that uncomfort, and I thought, God, what's wrong with me? And all of a sudden the thought came to me, you're feeling envy. And I thought, oh my God, I'm supposed to be there wishing those people well, but instead I was full of envy. But that's the first time in my life I felt envy, that I knew what it was I was feeling. I felt that way many times in my life, but I never knew it was envy. I always thought it was them. And these are the things that I have learned from coming to you people and staying here and working the steps and listening. Just these little things. And every time you get a new, one little insight, you get a new freedom, It's like, I don't know anything about electrical stuff, but those little, all those different colored wires they have that if you put them together, you shock, one another. And then they put those little boxes over them. Well, I figure that that's the way my insides were all my life. I had all these raw wires hanging out. And you see, my box became, whether it was my illness or my fear, whatever, and then alcohol became my box. It covered them. As long as I had alcohol, I didn't have to deal with them. I didn't have to feel them. But you see, when I came to you people, you took my box away. And then I had all those raw wires hanging out. That's why when you're new, you have all these feelings that come out. And I remember even when I was new, I'd say, well, heck, I was better off drunk. I mean, I didn't feel like this. Of course I didn't, because I had something to cover it up. You see, and that's what the ism is. That's what the 12 steps are today. You see, today, the 12 steps are my box. And when I'm uncomfortable and I go through things, then the only answer I have is these 12 steps. I have to apply these 12 steps to deal with whatever that feeling is or those things. And that's what it has been for me. I've had a lot of fun in sobriety, and I've had a lot of pain. And, many things happen. I thought at first, that once you did these things and you prayed and meditated, that when you prayed and meditated in the morning, God just says, okay, you've done that, so I'm going to move everybody out of the way, and it's going to be wonderful. But you see, that's not the way it is, because you have to deal with life out there, and there's a lot of pain out there. And the thing that's different about the pain in sobriety is that you don't have anything to cover it up. You got to deal with it, and you got to walk through it. And it's very hard sometimes, because sometimes it comes in bunches, and I've had a lot to go through the last few years, a lot of pain. But, I haven't had to go through it alone. We've gone through a lot of things, problems with the kids, and I lost both my parents. And in about a 2-year period, all kinds of things, 2 to 3 year period, everything imaginable has happened, just one right after the other. Like I said, I lost my parents. My closest and dearest friend died the month before my mother, and my aunt died 2 days later. We had problems with the children, out there, and we had financial disaster, went into a partnership that broke up, and we lost everything we'd worked for all our lives financially, almost came to losing our home through bad judgment, and, just had cars stolen. Lightning even hit. Can you believe it? In California, lightning even hit the tree in front of our house and toppled it, and it just seems like one thing right after another, and it seems like things kind of come in, like waves. It seemed like a wave had hit and knock you down, and you'd kind of get up and just about start to dry off, and another wave had hit. And then you get up and dry off, and another wave had hit, and that's just kind of the way. And just about the time I got up and thought, whew, it's going to be okay, then a typhoon hit on everything, just took everything, And just 10 days after the typhoon hit, people said, my God, nothing else can happen. It's gone. It's like you stand naked before God and everything has been removed, And somebody said, well, that's all. There's nothing else going to happen. Now it's got to come up from here, and 10 days later, my little dog was killed. And I remember thinking, my God, you mean you're not even going to let me have a little dog? What is this, And I had to come through these feelings, of, the pain so intense that feelings that I never knew were even there surfaced. All kinds of feelings that I hadn't had to deal with before. Jealousy, things that came out that, God, I'd never had them. And so I've had to learn a lot. You see, I never lived on the streets, and I didn't learn a lot of street knowledge. But I'll tell you, I have now. I kind of had a little protected environment, but I've learned a lot of the street knowledge now. And and a lot of times there isn't anything you can do about it, but come back to those steps and live a moment at a time, one more time, and start over. And, even I'd say to God, hey, God, I've had it. Can't you give this to somebody else? It's somebody else's turn. I've had enough. Come on, And, but, the only thing I could do was what I had been trained to do, and that is walk. And take the action, even though the mind wasn't there. I would just take the steps, take the action, and walk. And keep my commitments when it's the thing I didn't want to do most. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go someplace and have to be there and let people see my vulnerability. Let them see the pain. I mean, I'm supposed to be an example, for heaven's sakes. I'm supposed to show that everything is wonderful out here, But yet I did what I was asked to do, and I kept my responsibilities, and I walked the way they told me to walk, And even though I would say, hey, God, come on, in my heart, I always knew that it would be okay, whatever. Because you people taught me that, and I'd been here long enough to know that no matter what it is, when it really comes down to it, the only thing that there really is me and God. I mean, nothing else. You see, I learned, that, with the financial thing, I went through that. I remember going, because my mother, trying to take care of after my dad died, trying to take care of my mother and this business going down, and I'd have to go drive to the hospital to see my mother and drive into this business that was going, trying to hold it. And I remember crying all the way there, and I'd say, God, I don't care what it is. Whatever, you can take whatever and take everything. The only thing I want is whatever your will is for me. Just whatever it is, take it all. I really don't care. But then later I said, when this other wave hit, I thought, oh God, I didn't mean that, And, but anyway, I just did, like I said, whatever it was. But I learned, even the financial things I learned, I've never seen a hearse go by with a U-Haul behind it, And I know that, all the mansions of today, are the tenement houses of tomorrow, And all the fancy clothes or things you have today, are the rags and you're wiping up grease or something under the car, later on. And even our bodies don't stay, and so what do I really have? The only thing that I really have is what's in here. That's the only thing that's going to be forever, is what's inside of here. And all of the outside things really don't matter, because they're never going to be forever, any of it. So the only thing I can take care of is what's in here. You see, and I found out that the only part of my program that's real is what's in here. And how I act, how I apply it in my daily life. How do I apply this program? It's easy to come here or to come to not really easy, but, it's to stand up at a podium and talk, and make you think everything's fine, or go to a meeting for an hour and a half or whatever and do that kind of thing. And I can put on a show there, but how am I really in here? How am I, when I'm driving the freeway? How am I when somebody cuts in front of me? How do I act at home? How do I act with my children? How do I act with people that don't think I'm big something or other, don't care, how am I that way? Or with people that I work with or whatever. That's the real thing, about how I really am in here. My driving's improved since I got sober. I can remember times being at a stoplight and pedestrian walk. And then the light changes and there's somebody behind you honking, but you can't go forward because there's a pedestrian in front of your car, but they can't see that, so they start honking. Do you know it's no longer necessary for me to sit through 3 more lights for them to learn patience? I can just go right on, But, these are the kind of things, that I learn about myself. And I learn that, really the only thing I have is today. And that's all. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But, I know that if I keep doing what they tell me to do, that whatever it is, I'm going to walk through it and everything's going to be okay. It reminds me of a little story that I read about this farmer, and he had this old mule. And he was doing some construction. There was this big hole, and this mule fell down in the hole. And he couldn't get the mule out, and he didn't have a gun, and he knew the mule was going to starve to death. And he tried to figure out a way to get rid of this mule, and so he wouldn't have to suffer. And he had all these truckloads of dirt, from this construction. So he decided what he's going to do is dump this truckload of dirt on top of this mule, and he'd suffocate, and he'd be out of his misery. So he backs this old truck up, and he puts that dirt on the mule, and the mule just kind of shakes it off and stomps it under his feet. And so pretty soon, after several more truckloads of this dirt on top of the mule eventually just shakes it off and stomps it under his feet, and pretty soon he's up high enough that he can step out of the hole. And the moral of the story is that, you see, the thing that was supposed to be the complete undoing of the mule is the thing that eventually brought him out on top. And you see, I know that because I come to meetings and I see the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I see the healing love of God working through you people. And I see the miracle in the eyes of the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. I see the new people come to life. And I see the old people that go through problems come back to life. And what it is because of your healing love. The love of God working through you to me or through you to them, and I'm so grateful for it. That's why I'm very grateful to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you have healed me one more time, and I'm so grateful for it. Because I love being sober, and I love being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to thank you all.